Hi, everyone. We're so excited that you've joined us today and taken some time from your busy day to be part of this conversation. I am Catherine Scagnelli. I'm the head of growth and marketing efforts here at Canary, and I'll facilitate this conversation. But first, I just wanted to cover a few logistics for everyone. First, introduce yourself. Please use the chat function here to share who you are, where you're from, and what company you work with. We want this to be conversational. We want people to know who's in the room with us, be comfortable asking questions. With that said, the second thing I'll share is ask away. Please use the question and answer function here to ask any questions that you either have coming into this conversation or anything that the conversation sparks for you throughout. We will take some time at the end to share some of those questions with our panelists and give a chance for some of those to be answered. And we'll see what we can get to. And finally, we are recording this. We will share out a recording here at the end. And then I'll jump right into introductions of our wonderful panelists. We're so lucky today to be joined by some really great thought leaders in worker well-being. First, we have Matt Ball. Matt joins us from the Financial Health Network. He is a nationally recognized thought leader on workplace financial wellness. In that work, he builds relationships with employers committed to advancing financial health for their workforces. Thanks for joining us, Matt. And then we have Ernesto Boada, who is the co-founder and CTO of Sunny Day Fund, an employer-rewarded emergency savings program that enables workforces to stabilize financially and shine. Had to include that. I think it's a nod to the Sunny Day Fund name. He also brings experience leading technology initiatives at Workday and Western Union. Thanks for joining us, Ernesto.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Rachel Schneider, who's the founder and CEO of Canary. We are a company committed to giving individuals money at pivotal moments in their lives with dignity and efficiency, starting with employer-sponsored emergency relief funds. Rachel built Canary as a solution for the problems she uncovered researching the financial lives of Americans. Thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Happy to be here. And it looks like in the Q&A we might have somebody suggesting, hi Jenny, that looks like chat might be disabled. So if you're having a hard time answering our call to say hello, that's why. I'll fix it.
Well, so the Q&A might be disabled, and I don't know if I can fix that. Thank you for letting me know. Why don't you use the chat function where you're introducing yourselves to share your questions? We can see that that's not disabled. Apologies for that little snafu.
I think it might be the opposite. So introduce yourself in the Q&A because the Q&A might be working in the chat.
Oh, sorry. Chat looks to be disabled.
Yeah.
Oh, that's unfortunate. I see answers in chat. Maybe it's just, let me see.
We're getting people to introduce themselves within the Q&A, which is fine.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
Wherever you want to say hello.
As long as we can have a two-way conversation, I think we're good.
Awesome. All right, so everyone heard that, but please use the Q&A to introduce yourself. We'll use that for questions as well. All right, so to jump into our agenda today, I'll start with Matt. There are many HR leaders in the audience today. Now, obviously, they're here because they already know the importance of investing in their workers' well-being. But from your experience and the work that you're invested in, can you share why it's not only important, but needs to be at the top of their priority list?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, let me just say thank you, Catherine, to you and the Canary team and to Sunny Day Fund for inviting the network in here to talk, and me in particular. So it's always a joy to connect with friends and colleagues who are doing such important work. So thank you to that. To answer your question really bluntly, it's because it's what workers want. We see consistently in our research, as well as any other organization that's seriously committed to understanding financial health, that this is often the top priority for the workplace. And so certainly with the HR leaders on here, they're here because this is what people want. It's also important because in many ways, this is the area of wellness that employers have the most control over. And that's not to diminish the other areas of physical wellness, mental health, community, all of those things are important. But you can't teleport someone to see their primary care physician. You can't force someone to go see their mental health screening, but you can do things with financial health solutions that directly and materially impact the lives of people through using the right nudges, the right behavioral mechanisms. It's also the workplace, where most individuals gain access to the essential inputs of their financial lives: income, benefits, healthcare. And so that's really the reason why we're seeing just continued interest in workplace financial health and wellness. Not all HR leaders are aligned on this, and that's okay. But I think if you look objectively at the data and the insights, what you see, in fact, there was a great, I think it was Buck Consulting maybe a few years ago, put out a survey where they asked 500 HR leaders, say, what's the top priority for your organization? And the overwhelming consensus was mental health, really important. They asked workers within those same organizations, what's your top priority? And the worker said financial health. And so I think it's also important to make sure that you're understanding and aligning on the needs of your workforce. And that's really why workplace financial health is so important. It's also important because this is the place that employees are increasingly turning to for solutions. We're not seeing solutions at scale in other aspects of their financial life. And so the workplace, rightly or wrongly, is the place where people feel they have the most control over their financial inputs. They make decisions about comp, they make decisions about benefits in the workplace. So I think for all of these reasons, that's why it really matters. And I know we'll talk about why employers are caring about this, not the least of which is just the growing and overwhelming evidence of the importance of improved worker financial health and stability as a key driver of business performance. And we also are seeing increasing amounts of evidence, both in our work, academic research, and just anecdotes talking with HR leaders across the country. This is a real driver for them, and it's a real way to align incentives with business performance and employee performance.
Wonderful. And to quickly follow up on how can HR leaders, and apologies for the dog barking in the background, hopefully it's not too loud for everyone, but how can HR leaders here in this room influence this kind of meaningful organizational change from within?
Yeah, well, being here is a good first step, obviously. But I think the other part here is really understanding that I doubt any of the organizations on this phone don't have something in their proxy statements, something in their recruitment materials that says something along the lines of workers are our most important asset or a key stakeholder. And if that's really true and your organization really means that, then you should be caring and providing the inputs necessary to ensure that those folks are thriving. The key to that is understanding the needs of your people. And I know that Ernesto and Rachel and I will be talking about why these types of solutions are part and parcel of that need selection. But those are real ways in which to drive this valuable conversation. Your businesses are telling us and telling the public this matters. And so that's a real good bulwark to advance this work.
You mute yourself.
I'm muted
Sorry.
because the dog in the background. Apologies.
Oh.
But thank you for that, Matt. It's a great transition into talking to Rachel and Ernesto. We'll start out with Rachel. Thankfully, Rachel and Ernesto both bring a wealth of knowledge about this issue and worker well-being solutions, given that they currently lead companies committed to this work. Rachel, you've previously described employee relief funds specifically as a moral imperative and responsibility for employers everywhere. Can you briefly explain what employee relief funds are and, more importantly, why you feel this way?
Yeah, for sure. And as I heard you say that back to me, I thought, oh, moral imperative, like that can sound really bossy. So let me back up and like explain why I describe it that way. So what an employee relief fund is a charitable fund that an employer can set up that allows them to provide emergency grants to individuals when they're experiencing a crisis. And so it's a highly tax, it's an advantageous way in terms of tax treatment to get people money when they most need that money. So think natural disasters or the personal events that operate like a natural disaster, like a major medical event or a meaningful disruption in their house or a car accident, right? The kinds of things that really do derail families and make it difficult for workers to show up at work. So that's what we do at Canary. We help employers to set up funds like that, and we manage it on their behalf. The reason I think of this so strongly, I come at it in two ways. One is this is actually just what humans do. Like we do this. Like if somebody in your community has a crisis, then people show up for each other. They set up meal trains, right? They do bake sales to raise money for that person. They offer to babysit. Like we do show up for people, and that is just a part of the inherent humanity that we bring to community. And I think part of why I then think that's a moral imperative for companies is that when companies are actually where we spend most of our waking hours, like a huge amount of our time is spent in community with this group of people. And if we don't feel connected to them, there's something really lacking in the experience of work. So that shows up in the data and stuff like people who are happiest at work are people who feel supported by and appreciated by their manager. people who are happiest at work have a best friend at work. People who are, but I think those are specific data points that are part of a larger thing, which is people who are happiest at work feel like they are part of a community at work that sees them as people, right? That isn't just about you show up and you're a cog and you help to produce this revenue or you help to produce this product. Also, you as a being matter here. And so, I have a pretty philosophical bent on why employee relief funds matter so much. And then, of course, I think they are an imperative for companies for all the business reasons that Matt was talking about. But we can get more into that as we keep talking. I guess I'll just start with my soapbox. I'll step off my soapbox for a minute now. We can move to other parts of the conversation.
Yeah. You step off, and I'll invite Ernesto to share a little bit about his work with Sunny Day Fund. So employer-sponsored emergency savings programs are something we at Canary see as very complementary to the work that we do. Obviously, we've invited you here as part of this conversation. So we just want to we'll get into that a little bit more next with Matt. But first, we wanted Ernesto, for you to say a little bit about what you and your customers think about the importance of workplace savings programs in this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Well, thank you again for having me here. I haven't had a chance to start talking, but thank you very much. I mean, the importance of what we do right now is giving the possibility for financial stability, right? And be ready for those emergencies. And probably, I don't know if people know about us, but I'll quickly say we're a fintech platform that automate savings for emergency for employees. And we work with employers to be able to add reward programs on top of it. So employers can also contribute for those savings. So what is important? I mean, for employees, I mean, if we talk about that, is we always have to be kind of ready for some things that can happen, right? There are many things that happen. And unfortunately, most of the Americans are not saving enough money, right? We can count in their studies where many of them do not have more than $1,000 of savings. And when something happens, could be a medical issue, it could be something in your house, the roof or something, or somebody will losing their job, there's not savings. And then credit cards and other financial vehicles are there. So we are hoping to start making a difference in that space and helping to create that habit for savings. So the benefit for employees is to start moving away from that stress, from financial stability, to a much more better place. For employers, we believe that there are great benefits as well for employers, right? I mean, first of all, is to contribute to that great cause. And as having many employees to be able to start building that habit, right? And that ultimately what drives is a reduction of the attrition, or increase our retention for employees. It actually can be also an attractor, right? When I'm going to look for a new job and look at all the benefits, and they have emergency savings, or even the emergency relief fund, right? Those kind of benefits nowadays, where we have gone through the last 5 years, are very important for us. So definitely there's a significant amount of benefit in both sides. And I think, I mean, the best part for us is to be able to create quality in financial stability for everybody.
Wonderful. And I mentioned this, that we'd come back to Matt to bring it all together a little bit. But when it comes to this conversation, there are a lot of solutions out there, and there's no one size fits all approach to you and your workers and their unique financial situations. That said, Matt, how do you see employee relief funds, emergency savings accounts, and other non-traditional financial benefits intersect to give employees a comprehensive, well-rounded package?
Yeah, I think in some ways, the fact that we've labeled these things as emergency savings funds and hardship funds connote that they're not frequently needed. And if you actually look at the data, what you see is every 90 days, about half the US population experiences an unexpected bill, right? An unexpected expense. We also, as we continue to see things like climate change and other, displacement events, hardships are common. And so in some ways, like the fact that we've landed on the title of these solutions is misleading in terms of their utility and need in the workplace. And I have not come across a single employer in any industry, regardless of income level, where they're not hearing from workers about things that happen in their life that cause financial disruptions. And so in some ways, I think that solutions like emergency savings, hardship funds, which often work in tandem, and I think work best in tandem, are not, I think, sort of like one size fits all approaches. They are, every employee at some point is going to need these things. And so to sort of think about the one size fits all approach, I think these are the types of solutions that we're continuing to see are really essential benefits, and that workers are needing, because the reality is in their daily lives, they're experiencing these things with a frequency that sort of is not aligned with the way that we talk about these solutions in the market sometimes. The other thing I think is really important to understand is, the Fed uses the $400 sort of number, and that is a perfectly fine number, but 56% of unexpected expenses are more than $400. And, depending upon the data source, you sort of see that the average unexpected expense is about $1,400. And so when you think about an unexpected expense and the frequency of that, this is not a random or occasional occurrence. This is something that's impacting people on a daily basis. In fact, the last month I had 3 of these that showed up in my life. So I'm, covering all the bases for our panelists on the call. And so I think when you think about sort of one size fits all narratives, that works in certain contexts. But I think when you think about short-term liquidity solutions, like what Canary and Sunny Day Fund do and other providers, these are things that happen routine enough that they really should be part of an essential benefits package.
If you may add something, Catherine, sorry to just step in,
No.
but what we see in our data is our employees are saving an average of $2,200, right? So again, going back to those 400, definitely the amount of money that is needed is more. So I think it's very important to realize that, and that, we need more than that.
Yeah, I feel the need to chime in too. Because
Yeah,
the data
absolutely.
that you're sharing, Matt, is so critical. And I agree so strongly with the frame that you're offering, which is that people experience what we think of as an emergency or an unexpected event a lot. And a big chunk of what's happening there is that real wages have not kept pace with inflation for several decades. Like since the 70s, wages have been going up, but on an inflation adjusted basis, not as much of the cost of living. We've seen obviously like a meaningful inflation in the last year, right? It went up to 8%. We're like so excited that it's down to 3%. It's really important to remember that means two things. It's increasing at a slower rate than before. Not that it's not increasing. And it doesn't mean prices went down to pre-inflation levels. Like that just means we're now at 11% more than we were 2 years ago. So part of what, when we say, oh, people are experiencing unexpected events, part of what's happening is that people do in fact have less cushion to manage their lives than they had a generation ago, just structurally, through no fault or change that any individual has made themselves, but through the way that our economy has evolved. And so that's a huge part of why I come back to the idea that it's a moral imperative for employers to keep pace with that societal change. So if wages aren't going to keep pace with increases in the cost of living, and I have a ton of sympathy as a small business owner now for the idea that you don't always just have the option of increasing wages. I get it. And a topic for a separate webinar is how starting a business moves you to the right. So like, but setting that aside, I think that means employers have to be really creative about what are the cost-effective ways that we're going to innovate around what the historical package of goods we gave to workers in exchange for their labor was, right? And so to stop at wages plus health insurance plus retirement is just leaving way too much on the table for workers to manage on their own. And that's why I'm excited about like what Sunny Day Fund is doing, what we're doing, there's a ton of other innovation in the market that's trying to fill this gap and help employers do so in a cost-effective, efficient, easy way, because we know HR leaders have a lot on their plate.
Yeah, and just to add, even I think to build on the statements from Ernesto and Rachel, I think it's also really important to understand that when you think about the role of short-term cushions, right? You also look at some of the neuroscience research that's coming out around this and the role of not having that slack in your life and how that amplifies financial precarity. Dr. Carrie Leanne at University of Pittsburgh in particular is just doing fascinating work on this. And I think that really matters, particularly when you think about, like, you see all these sort of meta statements about productivity impacts. And to be honest with you, like, I think a lot of HR leaders look at those days, like kind of roll their eyes. It's like, oh, geez, yet another provider who's claiming to be the solution to productivity. And the reality is it's not about a single point solution, it's about understanding that the mechanism in the human brain that actually diminishes productivity is directly connected to the ambient level of stress we carry in our lives. And that ambient level of stress is anchored, looking at the American Psychological Association and other reputable sources, in financial stress. And so it's no reason why people are showing up at the workplace and you're seeing productivity impacts and you're seeing these meta studies. And so rather than focusing on some of those top line numbers, human beings' cognitive functions are directly impacted by carrying that around with them. And so as you're thinking about even building the business case, you are literally impairing the ability for your business to perform if you're hiring folks into your workplace, knowing that they're dealing with high levels of financial stress. It immediately impacts their productivity cognitively. And so I think those are also things to understand as terms like the mechanism for how this actually shows up in the workplace and why there's this connection to productivity.
But you know that I actually fully agree with what you're saying on the productivity. But sometimes productivity is a very complex terms because it has so many variables to it. And what we discuss internally is, for sure, what we see in a big difference is in the quality of the work and the engagement of the employee, right? That relation is changing. Now, can they do more work? It depends how you measure that productivity, but for sure, when you feel like somebody is with you and you have a partner in these situations, right? You feel much more engaged, you give a little bit more, and then eventually, to your point, translate to productivity. But definitely engagement is something that we see significantly improving in companies and their test case. I mean, their studies, like you just mentioned.
And I know, Catherine, we have questions for the people, but just one point, and I promise.
No, go for it. You covered my question without me even asking it, so this is good.
But I think the other really interesting thing is, we are seeing also big movements in the financial health space around creating ownership mindsets within the workforce, right? So whether this is employee ownership movements, and so another way that we're starting to see companies think about these types of solutions is to translate them from the sort of ownership lens, which is most businesses, Rachel, you know this, Ernesto, you know this, short-term cash reserves are a really important metric for businesses. In the same way that short-term liquidity is a really important metric for financial health for individuals. And so we're also starting to see companies framing these types of solutions as a means of also educating the workforce about how business and the business they create value for operates. And I think those are really important tactics to really bring not only leadership into the conversation, right? Convincing a CFO that, right, but our short-term cash reserves matter in the same way that personal cash reserves really matter to people. And so I think there's also ways to translate this into how businesses think about their operations. It's not that dissimilar to how we should think about translating these solutions, particularly for leaders who are maybe a little skeptical about certain financial health solutions.
Right. I'm glad for the conversation. As I mentioned, you kind of covered my last question without me even asking it, talking about the impact of these kind of solutions that you've seen in the workplace, everyone. So we'll move on to the next and kind of a round robin conversation. I liked how this last one worked, where we all kind of jumped in, but to talk about one company you've seen get it right in ways that maybe, it's not just an emergency relief fund, it's not an emergency savings program, but holistically, how are they getting it right, and how? I asked that twice, but how are they getting it right?
You want each of
Who
us
wants
to
to
go?
jump
I mean,
in?
I'll try to do, of course. I will speak about the in our world, but
Sure.
we have a particular company, and I'm not going to be able to say the name correctly, but it's called the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, right? Sorry, we call it CFF thanks to my limited English. But anyway, the point is, like, they have around 750 people, employees, and what they did, they would start looking at, like what Matt's talking about. They went directly to find out what was the employee looking for, what did they try to do, where the financial stress that they were seeing, and they just walked back from that, right? And then that's how we start working with them. And we implement the program, and we noticed that more than 50% of the employees immediately jump into the program, right? And we continue seeing that number growing. They also have measured, and that's what I said earlier, they have been measuring a little bit of the retention, right? And the attrition has reduced in 50% of the people that are already in the program, right? Now, if you compare numbers and things like that, usually attrition is in the single digits, let's say 8 or 9%. Well, get 4% back of employees to stay longer. I mean, that's invaluable for the company. So with this tiny effort, because again, people sometimes look about, well, how much I can really save, and depends of your salaries and things like that. Well, that minimum effort is making a big difference for them, and they continue driving with analytics, see how the behavioral, and they're also building with us the reward programs, so they can determine what are the right place where they can contribute the most. I think that what I want to point out last is that the best way is that this company is coming from the employee looking for the right solution. And I think they're doing an amazing work, and we're more than happy to be able to work with them and drive our solutions based on what they're finding.
Great. And Matt, Rachel, do either of you have something to jump in with?
Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay, sure. So, thinking about this question, I feel like I want to answer about a handful of companies, and just because one of the things that's hard about this is, or that can feel like a big lift if you're sitting in HR, is that there are so many paths that are possible. And you sitting in your company have to know what is going to make the most sense for us, right? Because company culture, senior leadership support, the way that you would communicate with your employees, all of those make a huge difference into what's going to work well and why. And so we see a variety of strategies that are really effective. So one thing that came to mind right away in this question is I saw that, and I was looking at who's on this call with us, and I saw Jenny Calvert's name, and Levi's comes to mind as a company that's been really thoughtful about how they can deliver both an emergency relief fund and emergency savings, and make sure that those two programs collaborate in some way and are together meeting the needs of employees. Also thinking about a company we work with that's in the home healthcare space, where they've made a huge commitment to the employee engagement side of an employee relief fund. So their goal is that all employees would contribute $1 a week out of their paycheck through a direct payroll deduction into the emergency relief fund. Now, if they get to that goal, this becomes a self-sustaining initiative, which is wonderful from the CEO and CFO's perspective. But what I get excited about, in addition to that, is it also makes it really clear that this is a shared initiative of employees, by employees, for employees, and it's about building the cultural connectivity across a company that find it very hard to do that, because home health care workers, by definition, never see each other, right? They each work in the home that they work in. And so how do you build a sense of coherent culture? And in home health care, it's incredibly difficult to hire and retain qualified staff. And it's one of the areas in our economy where jobs are really growing. And so to be able to solve that connectivity need is a really important value for the company. So those are a few that jump to mind. I think some of the things we're excited about seeing companies do going forward, I hope I'll be able to talk more about this in 2024, is seeing companies embed financial relief into broader advice giving. And so I think companies, and so for me, when I think about what are companies doing right, it's when they can choose from the menu of many, many things that are available to them, the things that are right for their culture, and integrate them in a way that employees can access easily and not get distracted and confused by having 18 options.
And just to jump in real quick, we do have a few questions in the Q&A that we'll get to next. So Matt, if you want to take a minute or two on this, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so I think, an example of an emergency savings program and then another example of the hardship fund program come to mind. So I think one of the things, every company we've worked with who has implemented an emergency savings program, I think underestimated the utilization. And so Ernesto, I am not surprised at all to hear that you are seeing 50+% enrollment. And for all the HR leaders on here, think about other voluntary benefits and the enrollment in those benefits. And you're looking like single digits, maybe you're getting to 25%. I have not seen a single employer, although I'm sure they're out there, who has launched an out of plan, meaning not connected to the 401k emergency savings program, and has not seen enrollment way higher than other quote unquote voluntary benefits. And I think what that underscores is when you have a solution that is directly responsive to a material need, people will use it. And I think that's one of the really aha moments with regards to the emergency savings. I think to your point, Rachel, which I think is a really important consideration for the relief funds, is that as people are even building emergency savings, the stats I shared earlier, they may experience an emergency before they've built up that liquidity. And there's no reason for, and there's no, I mean, in some ways, like that hardship fund is a financial lifeline that can keep people out of predatory financial practices. There's a reason why there are more payday lender brick and mortar buildings in the US than McDonald's and Starbucks franchises. It's because people are living with financial shock after financial shock every day. And so in many ways, I think the hardship fund is there not only for larger events that require support beyond that, but they can also be a bridge to getting folks into and maintaining that behavior of saving for the short term. And so I think those are really important. We worked with a company that during COVID took the guardrails off their hardship fund. They said, hey, if people are struggling, you just come in. And they fought with their lawyers and they fought with everybody. But they said, no, we're going to do this. And one of the aha moments that this company, this is a large national corporation, one of the aha moments they had was really also recognizing that they had been designing a lot of their benefit solutions with the notion implicitly or explicitly that these employees were risks to be managed and not humans worthy of investment and dignity. By the way, they have not put the guardrails back on their hardship fund, and they haven't seen like the hardship fund raided by these nefarious workers. What they've seen is that when people have a lifeline and they need it, they are deeply appreciative of that happening there. I know Scott Pooch is on here, and I'm sure Scott has or will ask a question about in-plan versus out-of-plan. In fact, I think I see it there. I think that's one of the reasons why we're also seeing employers really looking at out-of-plan emergency savings solutions, is really trying to remove it from the ERISA framework. Not that ERISA isn't important or that it doesn't work, but it adds complexity and it immediately puts a compliance overlay as you think about designing these programs. And compliance is important, it matters. But I think for workers, what they really want is they want to know that their employer is going to be there when they need them the most. And so I think that's why these two solutions work really well together, and why we just continue to see high levels of engagement when employers deploy emergency savings, and the absolute essential quality of having that hardship relief fund as a bridge for the big shocks, but also to help weather those inevitable things that happen in people's lives. So those would be two examples I'd share.
I just want to add one comment, and it goes a little bit of my previous life and this life now. And one of the things that we focus a lot the last 4 or 5 years has been how truly to have our employees engage and have a sense of belonging, right? Because now with distributed work, remote work, many things that happen. I mean, we don't want to need to get to HR leaders have had to take a lot of new set of responsibilities, right? And it's interesting because talking about employee experience, talking about many things like that, HR had to step in and help the company, right, to make sure the mission is accomplished and all those things. So what I'm going with this is that now we have all this set of programs, and the best part of this is like we definitely supporting employees in their feelings, right, and really what is important for them in terms of helping them. And I think that what I said earlier definitely helps on bringing a little bit of a change in that space. So I think this is a great opportunity to what we're seeing and what the government is going to be doing through Secure Act and things like that, as we get to answer some of those questions, is that we definitely are beginning to humanize more and more that experience for our employees. And I think that's fantastic. This is the change in culture that we have nowadays.
Yeah, and I know, Matt, you mentioned Scott Pooch, who I also see in the Q&A, and Ernesto, you mentioned Secure 2.0, and I know there's been a lot of talk here at Canary about Secure 2.0 and what 401k hardship withdrawals, Scott, that you mentioned in your comment, what those mean in the reality of the work that we do, for the reality of the work that we do. And so I know, Ernesto, you're thinking about it deeply at Sunny Day Fund as related to Secure 2.0 and emergency savings accounts, but also we hear it at Canary from clients all the time is like, you know, employees have to rely on early 401k withdrawals in some of these situations, and that's money they have to pay back. An emergency grant from Canary is something they get the money, they never have to pay back. So emergency grants are a great alternative, as our clients are seeing, to early 401k withdrawals. So I wonder if you could all say a word about these solutions as alternatives to things like early 401k withdrawals that we see in the workforce.
Rachel, you want to go ahead first?
Do I want to? Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like Catherine said it for, like, I don't have a lot
Yeah.
to add other than we often hear from HR leaders that having fewer withdrawals is a core objective for them. I'm going to do a terrible job at the research, which I'm going to do a terrible job of attributing, but the research that has been done by, I believe it's the Aspen Institute, along with some others on this, is that unsurprisingly, like who is doing the most hardship withdrawals? It's going to be people of color, it's going to be women, it's going to be lower paid folks, right? So this should surprise no one, but it's a huge problem, and it does mean that retirement security for the most vulnerable workers in our society is, of course, going to be worse than it should be, and we shouldn't underestimate the societal implication of that. We have made a commitment as a country that we're only going to withstand a certain amount of elder poverty. So if we don't make sure people are saving for themselves, we're going to find ourselves as taxpayers in a real bind, given the changing demographics of our country and our aging population. So I can make the societal case for why we don't want 401k withdrawals. I can make a fairness case for why we don't want 401k hardship withdrawals. And the only way to resolve it, because people withdrawing for very good reasons, is to enable people to have emergency funds today. And so, we're a big fan of the joint solution of encourage people to save for themselves in an emergency fund, and understand that there will always be moments where, despite people's best efforts, they simply experience an emergency they cannot afford to pay for themselves. And an employer is one of the organizations, one of the entities that should show up for them in that moment.
Yeah, and I will add that I mean, these are complementary programs, and I think I'm speaking probably for Rachel as well. We're not wanting less contributions to the 401k by the company or by the employee. We actually want that to continue really growing and growing more and more, because that's funding that we want to make sure it is not necessarily for emergencies, but it's something that we can allocate for the future. So our programs are not competing with that. Actually, we have seen different behavior when people start, even companies start contributing to these programs. The 401k growth continues, sometimes even faster. But I think what Scott says here in the question is alarming, right? We see, and this is studies from Transamerica, with 37% of the people that enroll in 401ks have withdraw money or have loans against. And loans sometimes, and I'll tell you this full transparency, it might be good because you're paying the interest to yourself, but the problem is the conditions to it. And if you end up failing to pay those loans, that's an early retirement, and it has a lot of fees and things like that. So again, that's very alarming, as Rachel talked about, in terms of what the government will have to do in the future and things like that when that amount of money and savings for people go down. So for us, it's important to make sure Secure Act 2.0 continue, right, growing. We are out of plans, so we have a little bit of opportunities to offer different, let's call it benefits sharing or benefit models, right? But we're not competing with the 401k. We actually founded the 401k, and we partner with those companies as well, because we want to make sure, and we see results of changing behavioral. And remember, I mean, I think what at least we try to do as well is we need to change the human behavior in terms of habit of savings and readiness for things at the employer and the employee. I think that's kind of where, in my opinion, it is one of our biggest contributions, is behind the scenes change that for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, there's a math problem here, which is 51, some estimates are 51% of workers in Russell 1000 companies don't make a living wage. A third of the US workforce makes $15 or less an hour. Those certainly contribute to the retirement savings crises. But I don't think what workers are saying is, geez, design a more elegant solution to get me into the retirement plan through this complicated after-tax savings mechanism as the bulwark to solve my financial challenges. I think what workers are saying is they don't have enough coming in, and they have a never-ending supply of financial shocks, and they need help with that most immediately. I think the long-term solution to retirement savings is we have to reimagine how we pay people in this country. And short of that, you can have the best, brightest technical solutions in the 401k laws. It's not going to solve the problem. only half the U.S. workforce participates in an employer-sponsored retirement plan. So we've had 401ks for years, and only half the people in the country are using them. And so clearly there's disconnects here between the solutions for retirement savings. And I think pairing it with emergency savings is certainly an elegant solution, but I'm not sure it's actually what the workforce needs. I think what the workforce needs is they need more support in their daily financial lives. And we need better design with 401k plans going forward. But that has to be rooted in people just having enough material coming in to their lives that they can afford to save. And so from my perspective, like just connecting emergency savings to retirement plans, it's great that it's a functionality, it's an option, and it may make sense for some folks. But I don't think that's what the American workforce is clamoring for. I think what they're saying is we're struggling in our daily lives. We need simple solutions that help us solve that. And we don't need more elegant technical designs of solutions that we really don't understand as a means of solving these problems. And that's why we see outrageously high enrollment rates by and large in out-of-plan emergency savings. It's solving a material need. It's easy to do. It's easy to understand, and people need it. So I think.
Sorry, but I will add something else there as well, is like financial equality, right? Because we have employees from all, I would call it, ages and workarounds of life. And the fact that we can offer this through employers, that's important, is to work with employers. And I think it's the same thing with Rachel, that we work with companies, is because we can just make it an opportunity from an equal financial stability for everybody. And I mean, not to open another can of worms, but we do see big differences on savings from new generations to probably old generations, right? And we cannot forget about that it's important to do that. And even in the 401k, I may not have all the right stats. Maybe, Matt, you have better ones. People rush to save at the end of their lives into 401k, but it's too late. It's too late. So we need to make sure that we start from the beginning. And both planning for us is key for everybody to be able to create that habit.
Great. And we are running up against time. There is one question I wanted to touch on briefly before we close with some final observations. There was a question from Robert Moore that was already addressed by Rachel, was asking about the size of a company, the number of employees you would need for an employee relief fund. I just wanted, Rachel or Ernesto, if you wanted to say 30 seconds about the size of the company and what matters or doesn't matter in that equation for the people on this call.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm so glad you pulled that up.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ernesto.
No, go ahead, Rachel, go ahead. Go ahead, you start.
Well, I was going to say, I'm glad you pulled that out of the chat, because even though my quick answer is, oh, we can work with anybody, the longer answer is smaller companies in particular are doing emergency funds already.
Yep.
They're just doing them off the side of somebody's desk or one-off when an employee comes to the CEO and says, I can't work today because X is happening to me. And the number of stories I hear from companies where the CEO says, so I ended up writing a check out of my personal checkbook, right?
Mhm.
Huge. And, one of our clients said, and the danger with that is, of course, now we're going to do it unequally, because the money's only going to go to people who raise their hand.
Mhm.
And that means for every person who raises their hand, you can assume there's a handful more having the exact same problem who didn't speak up.
Yes.
And so there's a huge risk of inconsistency and a lack of fairness. And that'll do more damage to your culture than the one-offs. Than saying no. And yet saying no feels terrible. You don't want to say no.
Yes.
So I actually think employers of all sizes need to be thinking about this. And then we, work with employers to figure out what's the most efficient, effective way to do it, given who you are.
And Ernesto, I wish we had time to
Okay.
go through your answer here too,
Oh,
but we are
no.
running up against time, and I just want to close it out for our attendees today who have to get back to their days. But before we go, I just wanted to take the opportunity to share that all of us are deeply invested in this work and helping individuals, employees or not, live happier, healthier lives. And we know that their financial circumstances are key to that. So thank you for being part of this conversation. I hope it doesn't end here. I hope you bring it back either to some of our panelists on this call, get in touch with them on LinkedIn, or in your own workplaces, bring it back to your colleagues and talk about the work that you're doing. But thank you all, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for moderating, Catherine.
Of course.